So circular has a few key objectives. So it make a priority list and make parties responsible for their waste and set up a super fund to clean the abundant waste site. And the last thing I want to mention about this law is to advance scientific and technological capacities in hazardous waste management, treatment, and disposal. If we were in 1980, we probably are more aware of several years ago the RCRA was responsible as a pioneering law to make people responsible for their waste. And in this law, we further make people and the parties be responsible about the knowledge and the technology of advancement. Because by that time, there's a lot of things unknown. We just start cleaning those waste site, right? There's a lot of chemicals. We don't know their properties. We don't know their impacts in the environment. So the knowledge and the scientific knowledge and development of technology, that is very crucial in understanding and clean up those hazardous waste. And over 44,000 sites we evaluated, that's a lot. And about a quarter were considered serious enough to warrant further investigation. And list of these sites became known as a national priority list. And until today, the list is still active. And many companies, they rather hire their lawyers to fight their inclusion in cleanup efforts than just putting the money to start cleaning up because it is super expensive. And about 1,100 sites have been cleaned up. And remember that number, right? It's 44,000. Only 1,100 sites have been cleaned up. And that already takes 27 billions in total expenses. So it is very expensive. And the fact that any party could be held responsible for the entire site cleanup caused problems. And that resulted in two pieces of legislation that provide exemption to two kinds of parties. One is Superfund, which is SARA, that is one law, that's amendment to the circular, and another is SBLRBRA, that's a Small Business Liability Relief and the Brownfields Revitalization Act. So SARA has one specific provision. So the law says prior to purchase of commercial real estate, a person or entity conducted a all appropriate inquiry, they will not be held responsible for cleanup. So anybody do a pre-assessment of those sites, they are not responsible for cleaning up any contamination on the property. And this was known as ILD, Innocent Line Owner Defense. That makes sense, right? If anybody uses those abandoned sites, they should not be paying money to clean it up. And because of the provision of the circular, many previous abandoned industrial sites were left vacant. And those sites were known as brownfields. And the passage of SBR, this is a long name, Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act, include new language that protected purchasers from liability under circular. And the purchases of those commercial real estate must perform ASTM Phase 1 environmental site assessment prior to purchasing the land. And we have some volunteering standards also, which is called ASTM International Phase 1 Environmental Science Assessment Standard E. And another one I want to mention, I don't know if any student here work for any companies handling chemicals. This is very popular standard, which is called the International Organization for Standardization. That has a standard for environmental management systems known as ISO 14000, and many organizations, corporations seek that certification as a way to indicate they're controlling their impact and improving their environment performance. And when people look for a job, if you work in a company dealing with any chemicals, they probably in the job description to say that you better be familiar with those standard systems, and that will be a advantage if you are familiar with those standards. Those are the voluntary standards. So the third thing I want to talk about is the hazardous waste management choices. I think this is my focus of this chapter, to apply the knowledge you gained before from the previous chapter to this chapter, which is really simple principles. Okay, so the EPA promotes a pollution prevention hierarchy, which is called P2. Reduce the amount, recycle waste, and treat waste to reduce hazard or volume, and dispose waste on land or incinerate them as a last resort. I want you to think about this, guys, to compare this with the city trash. So in the previous chapter, we emphasized the 3R, right? The reduce, reuse, and the recycle. Here, it's the same principle applying to the hazard or hazard solid waste. Some of them are liquid or even gas. So let's go back to let's revisit previous chapter. I cannot emphasize enough the principle of 3R. And here I want you to remember that still apply to the hazardous waste management. We dispose of waste on land or burn them. That is the last way. First, we should try to reduce, recycle, and reuse. If we look at this pie or this graph, and this going from a lot of waste to 0, okay? So to reduce and reuse, we stop leaks and we redesign or process, reuse, and we try to reuse. We try to reuse whatever is available, and before we dispose of them, and prevent spills and concentrate waste, clean solvents, educate employees, and substitute less toxic raw materials. Those are all means to reduce and reuse. And then we try to recycle with recycle solvent for other purposes, exchange waste with other industries, and burn waste as fuel. So we try to reuse those hazardous toxic chemicals. And the last, if we cannot get rid of them by the 3R, we treat them. We can neutralize acids or bases, so they are not acidic or basic anymore. And we filter and separate them. We can do biodegradation, right? Some of them probably could be like nutrients, right? And solidification. If we cannot get rid of the waste by those 3 procedures, then in the last, we securely bury them in a landfill site, or we burn them, or we bury them really deep. It's called deep well injection. If you did the Annenberg homework on carbon dioxide sequestration, you will know that to bury them really deep, that is a resort, the last resort, but it is very expensive though. It's very technological.